Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Timothy. Today we're looking at 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 6 through 9. Now you recall that yesterday we ended by Paul giving Timothy a warning against those false teachers who had a form of godliness but lacked the power thereof. They just had the form of religion but none of the reality. Now, in this paragraph, Paul gives some examples of what those kind of people do. Those who have the form of godliness but deny its power. This is what they do to the church, or what they try to do in the church. So 2 Timothy 3, verses 6 through 9. They are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over gullible women, who are loaded down with sins and are swayed by all kinds of evil desires. Always learning, but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. These kind of people, they work their way into the homes of those who are vulnerable. They convince those who aren't fully established in the foundational doctrines of the faith. They convince them to listen to us, and we'll give you some teaching. And then they lead them astray. They lead them into falsehood, to false doctrine, to false teaching, and they lead them away from faith. They lead people into sin and the following of evil desires rather than a life of holiness and godliness. They are always learning, but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Now, they're learning all kinds of philosophies and all kinds of teachings that are not of God, that are not of the Scripture. So they're always learning, but what they're learning is false doctrine, false teaching, and they never come to a knowledge of the real truth, and they lead other people away from it. And then he gives a historical example. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these teachers oppose the truth. Now, who are Jannes and Jambres? Now, you read in the book of Exodus that when Moses was sent by God to Pharaoh to say, "Let my people go," you remember Moses was opposed by the court magicians of Pharaoh, who tried to replicate some of his miracles and tried to oppose God's work in Egypt. Now in Exodus, these court magicians are not named. But in between the Testaments, in between the Old and the New Testament, there was some literature that arose that named these court magicians, and they named them Jannes and Jambres. So these are two of the court magicians who opposed the work of God in trying to deliver the Israelites from Egypt. They stood opposed to God's truth, to God's work, to God's mission. And likewise, Paul says there are people who infiltrate the church today, who say they are on our side, who say they are true prophets of God, but they're actually opposing the work of God. They are opposing the teaching of God, and they're leading people away, just as those court magicians in Pharaoh's day stood against the work of God. These false teachers, these false prophets today stand against the work of God. They oppose the truth. They are men of depraved minds who, as far as the faith is concerned, are rejected. But they will not get very far, because as is the case in these men, their folly will be clear to everyone. Paul lets us know that ultimately these false teachers will fail because they are teaching that which is a lie. They have rejected the faith, and they have been rejected by God, and the lie they are teaching will be thrown down. One day all will be revealed as what it is. The truth will stand. The truth of the gospel will endure. And these false teachings and these false teachers will be exposed for what they are, and they will be thrown down. That's why Paul says to Timothy, you must stand against them now, because they're trying to lead people from the faith. One day it will be clear to all, but right now it may be that some are being deceived. So Timothy, stand for the truth and stand against their false teachers, and do not allow them to infiltrate and lead the church astray by their false doctrine. Hope you join us tomorrow. We'll continue our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Timothy. Paul's going to kind of switch gears in this next paragraph and begin to talk about the example he has left for Timothy to follow as a man of faith. We'll begin to look at that tomorrow. We'll start at chapter 3, verse 10 in our next session of our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Timothy.